Welcome to our broadcast. OJ Simpson pleaded not guilty today to the murder of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman.
This complaint in case number BA097211 in count 1 that on or about June 12, 1994 in the county of Los Angeles, you committed the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A in that you did willfully and unlawfully and with malice aforethought murder Nicole Brown Simpson. It is further alleged that in commission and attempted commission of this offense, that you did willfully, that you did personally use a deadly and dangerous weapon, a knife, said use not being an element of the above offense in the meaning of Penal Code Section 12022B. In count 2, your charge is charged that on or about June the 12th, 1994, in the county of Los Angeles, you committed the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187, in that you did willfully, unlawfully, and with malice aforethought murder Ronald Lyle Goldman. It is further alleged that in the commission and attempted commission of that offense, that you did use a deadly and dangerous weapon, a knife, said use not being an element of the above offense within the meaning of Penal Code Section 12022B. It is further alleged that as to counts 1 and 2, you will have been in this proceeding convicted of more than one offense of murder in the first or second degree within the meaning of Penal Code Section 190.2A3. Mr. Simpson, do you understand the charges as I read them to you?
Yes.
And have you discussed those charges with your lawyer, sir?
Yes.
At this time, do you wish to enter a plea guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
The crime and the events following it have shocked and mesmerized the nation. Here with us tonight are Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law professor and author of the upcoming book, The Abuse Excuse; Susan Herman, director of the Domestic Violence Division of Victim Services; sports writer and author Frank DeFord; David Margolick, the New York Times National Legal Affairs correspondent; and Cheryl McCarthy, columnist for New York Newsday. Later this broadcast, we'll be joined by Jeff Greenfield of ABC News. Alan Dershowitz, let me begin with you. Tell me, from a legal question, following what happened today and O.J. Simpson's plea, what you think of this case, the legal implications, and what the prosecution, where they may be, and where the defense is.
Well, the crucial, obvious question is, did O.J. Simpson do it? Will his blood eventually match after the DNA test? The prosecutor assumes it will and is posturing as if this is clearly a case in which the defendant did it, and the defense will be a version of the abuse excuse. I did it, but I was a battered husband, I was insane, I was provoked, it was a crime of passion. Of course, he's right if the evidence proves in a way that the defense can't really contradict that he was there, then the only defense will be a mental status defense. And frankly, which mental status it is doesn't matter as much as that the defense is looking for a hook on which they can get a sympathetic jury to hang either a verdict of acquittal or diminished responsibility. That's what happened in the Bobbitt case. Insanity defense, nobody believes she was insane. That's what happened in the Menendez case, hung jury out of sympathy. So the real quest at this point is for whether or not his celebrity can be used in his defense or as an aggravating factor, and both sides are now maneuvering to try to use that. The prosecution is leaking, is making inappropriate statements to the press, is trying right away to try this case in the press. The defense is responding, foolishly in my view, falling into a trap. The defense attorney said on television, my client was at home. That was not a wise decision for him to make, because if it turns out he wasn't at home, he may have to be called as a witness and ask the question, on what basis did you make that statement? Did he tell you he was at home? It wouldn't be lawyer-client privilege because the lawyer disclosed it to the press. So we're seeing a lot of posturing at this point. Too early to tell what the ultimate defense will be, but we have some pretty good ideas.
But you are saying that the defense has to give the jury a reason to follow their compassionate instincts, which they may feel for this person.
They do, because otherwise the judge won't give an instruction permitting for a defense. The way it works is the prosecution has the burden of proof, and then the defense has to at least introduce some evidence to suggest possible defenses. Once they've overcome that very limited burden, it's all in the jury's hands. And we see in the Menendez case, even though the jury can be instructed by the judge, you're not allowed to find self-defense. Juries, in cases of this kind of celebrity, in the end, do what they want to do, and you, of course, can't appeal a verdict of acquittal. Double jeopardy precludes that.
David, does celebrity work for or against O.J. Simpson in this case?
Well, I think in this case it clearly works for him, because given the nature of the charges against him, if he weren't famous, he'd be in terrible trouble now. And
he's not in terrible trouble?
Well, I mean, he's not in as terrible trouble as he might have been.
Boy, I couldn't disagree more.
Well, I think.
Well, why couldn't you disagree more? Then?
Well, I think if he were not a famous person, this case would be plea bargained down to second-degree murder. It's yet another domestic abuse case, and courts are very sympathetic to those kind of cases. He'd get 15, he'd be out in 8. I think there's not going to be a plea bargain because he's a celebrity.
But I think, well, I mean, on the other hand, if he weren't a celebrity, there wouldn't be this gigantic reservoir of sympathy for him, and he could well, particularly in a place like Los Angeles, where the prosecutors have come under a lot of criticism for being lenient in other cases, he might well have gone off to the gas chamber for this if he were convicted.
Charlie, there's also, you say celebrity. There are celebrities and there are celebrities. It's not necessarily one type. O.J. Simpson has, except, it's a large except, but except for the one case of wife beating, he's got an impeccable reputation. Everybody thinks of him as the smiling, engaging, wonderful character.
Well, beyond that, it's coming even from people who knew and worked closely with him. They talk about the fact that this is a person who's different from Mike Tyson or Pete Rose or other people who there was some flaw in their character that was visible.
And there is no discernible flaw that we have ever seen in
Other
O.J.
than
this one.
Right.
which
No, and
relates.
other than the case of the famous New Year's battery
That's what I'm saying.
incident.
Apart from that, but as a celebrity, and by the way, that particular case had pretty much been lost in memory. Very few people could even remember that. It received very little attention at the time. And I think if you'd stopped people on the street 3 weeks ago and said, name one thing wrong with O.J. Simpson, they couldn't have done it.
That raises an interesting question about the coverage of the event at the time,
Yeah.
and whether the sports journalism community let this man off the hook.
Oh, we did.
Yeah.
Oh, there's no question about that.
I
Not
mean,
only
Hertz didn't drop Simpson as its spokesman.
nobody did. NBC continued to use him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, O.J. has always gotten a free ride, and boy, he sure did in this case. It was buried. The story was buried in all newspapers, and even the Los Angeles Times.
Consciously buried because?
I can't answer that. I think it's probably a little bit what everybody says about abuse cases, that we kind of accept it.
Don't you think
Susan?
there's growing feeling now that he not only got special treatment from his employers and his sponsors, but that the judge in that case gave him special treatment, that he was let off the hook, and that's another factor in the scene right now. He was let off far too easily in 1989. Let's see what happens
You know
now.
better than anybody that he didn't get special treatment, that
I'm not saying
ordinary
he got
people
special treatment. I'm
get
saying he got
lenient
poor
treatment
treatment.
when it comes to abusing spouses. That's one of the great tragedies of America today, is that he didn't get such special treatment.
Well,
a lot of people
he got
get away
poor
with it.
treatment the way most batterers do.
That's right.
But I think his treatment was in some ways a little bit worse. I think phone counseling at your leisure is a little bit more celebrity-oriented than the run-of-the-mill batterer, who probably is asked to either attend a batterer's course or gets nothing. But phone up a psychiatrist when you can handle it and when you can make that phone call is not a typical sentence.
Even his community service was basically
At
what he
his
was
own
already
choice.
doing. Yes.
And of course, the irony is that perhaps if he had been treated a little more toughly, if he had to face 30 days in jail,
right.
if he had perhaps his contract with
We may not be
NBC
here.
pulled or threatened to be pulled, he might not be sitting in a jail cell now.
Let
charged
me
with
raise a
murder.
couple of other legal issues. Premeditation.
Premeditation can occur in an instant. It's interesting. First-degree murder requires premeditation, but second-degree murder requires malice aforethought, but without premeditation. It's total gobbledygook.
So malice
It is
aforethought.
designed- There's no difference. I've been teaching this 30 years, and nobody in any of my classes could ever figure out the difference between first-degree murder and second-degree murder. It's just, if you really don't like him, you come down with first-degree murder. If you don't like him, but he's not that bad, it's second-degree murder. And if he's provoked, then it's manslaughter. But these legal
So
formulas
liking the
don't
defendant
work.
is everything.
Very
How you
important.
feel about the jury feels.
And how you feel about the victim. If you dislike the victim, like in the Bobbitt case, it was very easy to acquit, or the Menendez case. Here we're going to have an interesting situation because, at least as of now, we have two likable victims. Now you're going to see the defense brutally attacking these victims. By the end of this trial, nobody's going to have a kind thing to say about the two dead people. And it's going to be interesting because you can hear a lot of people complaining about that, but the very same people who complain about that are going to cheer sometimes when the person who did the killing is a woman and the dead victim is a man. There's a lot of posturing in a gender way about these kinds of cases.
Self-defense.
Self-defense is interesting. I think what a lot of people have failed to understand in this case is the significance of not finding the weapon. They haven't yet found the weapon. If it turns out that the weapon belonged to either of the alleged victims, in the case, that might help provide a self-defense. If, and on the other hand, the weapon belonged to O.J. Simpson, it's going to be very hard to find self-defense. I mean, one possible scenario is he comes home, he sees them together, he's in a rage, he slaps his wife. He's then attacked by Goldman and then fights. Since no witnesses can testify as to what happened, except perhaps O.J. Simpson, there's no limit to what possibly can emerge as a self-defense scenario.
How do you get around the gloves?
Well, we haven't heard yet what the, I don't trust leaks. And the ski mask stuff and the glove, I'm going to wait and see what the forensics show. But, it's amazing. How did the Menendez brothers get around the 18 things they got around? In the end, the jury liked them better than they liked their dead parents.
If you don't trust leaks, why are we all assuming that he's guilty?
Well, we can't assume.
Why are we all assuming that he at least was involved in some kind of act like this?
We have blood tests, which apparently, or at least are a general match. We have the prosecutor who's running for re-election going out on a limb saying, in effect, I predict this is going to be an I did it, but I have an excuse defense. There's no reason to jump to conclusions, but the defense is clearly preparing. Remember one thing that's interesting. The defense attorney, I bet you, doesn't know what happened. He doesn't know any more than we know.
Why would you say that? I mean, you had conversations with him.
Sure, but clients don't tell you the truth. He's probably been told by Simpson, because he has to have been told by Simpson, I wasn't there, I didn't do it, because he then went on television and said, my client wasn't there, he didn't do it. Does he believe that? He'd be a fool if he did.
What might be an explanation for Weitzman taking leave of the case?
Oh, there are a lot of possible explanations.
And you accept him at face value that he was a friend and he was busy?
Well, first of all, he was a friend. That means he may also have been a witness. He is busy because he's also representing Michael Jackson, and either Jackson or Simpson may have said to him, look, you can't represent us both. You've got to pick and choose which of us you're going to represent, and he's been representing Jackson longer than Simpson. There are a lot of possible reasons.
Well, I mean, the reason that I've heard is that he allowed Simpson to talk to the police for 3.5 hours and didn't interpose himself and somehow keep his client from blabbing for a long time. And Simpson may well have dug himself in a hole, and Simpson has other legal advisors who were sort of pulling the strings behind him, and they were irked that Weitzman let this happen, so they fired him.
What else are you hearing, David? I mean, you're part of the
Well, I mean, I'm also hearing that Shapiro is not going to be the trial lawyer, that Shapiro is basically known for making pleas, and this is not a case where a plea is going to be agreed to.
Shapiro can also be pulled.
And there's great jockeying going on in Los Angeles to take his place, or at least to supplement the legal team and be the laboring oar in the courtroom.
You mean everybody wants this because of the high-profile case?
Absolutely.
And
it's a dream case.
A fee-paying case, which are rare in these kinds of high-profile situations. But it's interesting. The prosecution, in the end, has control over whether Shapiro is going to go forward as the lawyer, because the prosecution can give a witness list, which includes as potential witnesses at the trial the people who were with Simpson when he made his flight, and those include some of the psychiatrists and his lawyer. They may be called as witnesses. And so if the prosecution decides to pull that gambit and call him as a witness, he would probably be disqualified to be the lawyer. Now, the prosecution knows that, and the prosecution knows that he knows that. So we see some, I think, subtle head games being played here.
Yeah. But the prosecution might actually want to keep him on as principal counsel because he's not experienced in court.
Frank, I don't know how well you knew O.J. Simpson. You clearly knew him because you worked at NBC.
But I did not know him well, and we would chat and say hi, and that's the extent of it.
You know a lot of the people that were his good friends.
Yes, I
What
would.
are they saying?
What do they think now?
Yeah.
I think they think what most Americans think, only in a much more heightened, despairing way, that yes, he probably did it from what we know, but God, I don't want to believe that. I think that's the
Because
general.
nothing about it reminded me of anything I knew about O.J. Simpson.
I don't know anybody in my life that I think could have done this. And I'm sure that most people who knew O.J., all people who knew O.J., could not conceive of this. Isn't it funny we keep saying, if only he'd shot them, somehow it would be better.
Because it was less brutal.
Less brutal. I mean, that is a common thing that you hear on the radio, and I've heard any number of people say it. But the idea that he would, if he did, do this with a knife is almost more than people can comprehend.
Frank, let me ask you a question,
I'll
though,
come to
about
Susan,
the state of knowledge about O.J. Simpson. Whenever somebody does something so aberrational like this, at least in newsrooms and journalistic circles, you start to hear all these dark rumors that people in the know knew for years about cocaine use and abuse and philandering and all of this, and there's a conspiracy of silence that went on. Did you or anybody you know ever hear anything like that, or is this just a bolt out of the blue?
No, I think the cocaine, that kind of talk has come up after the fact. Whether there's any truth to it or not, I have no idea. But apart from the wife beating, and you say philandering, we know he did that because his first wife complained about that when they broke up. But apart from that, O.J. was pretty clean.
You keep saying apart from the wife beating, that's like, you know, Mrs. Lincoln, apart from that, how did you enjoy the play? I mean, that's
and
pretty
we're acting
serious
as if the wife
stuff.
beating were just this one incident, and it wasn't. We know of at least 9 incidents.
But what
in which
David was asking was,
he
is
battered
there a
Nicole.
catalog of other sins?
Yeah.
And I'm saying, no, there
I
wasn't.
want to come back to Cheryl in just a minute, but when you look at
Does
the
this look
facts
like a
as you
common?
know, how does this differ? How is this similar? What can you tell us about cases that you know of in which there's been a pattern of spousal battery leading to
I can tell you several things.
this kind of
First,
violence or some approximate
I can tell you
approximation?
that the Justice Department, for instance, estimates that only about 20% of the men who batter their wives or partners regularly in any way show signs of violence in any other aspect of their lives. These aren't people who beat up their bosses when their bosses challenge them or slap a waiter when they don't get their food on time, or these are good people in all visible signs other than the way they are at home with their partner. It's very common, it's very typical for there to be some sort of Jekyll and Hyde presence. That's what women talk about when they get together, battered women when they get together in a support group. That's what batterers talk about, that this is the one aspect of their life. Other than this, they handle their life seemingly fairly well, or they can handle their life fairly well. We also know that violence, once it begins, and it doesn't usually begin with physical violence. Domestic abuse usually begins with another form of coercion, either financial or emotional abuse, another form of a man exercising regularly power and control over a woman.
Abuse like rape is about control over another person.
Yes, absolutely. This is about controlling women. This is about men feeling strong and powerful. And once it begins, it usually continues and it usually escalates. So the fact that we know, as Cheryl said, that they were at the house, police were at the house at least 8 times by both accounts, both the husband and the wife's accounts. This is a pattern of abuse. This is something that was going on for a long time.
Why would he say, I'm a battered spouse, in this note that he wrote? Is that typical? To view himself as victim.
It is very typical for men who batter to feel as though they were in some way provoked, which
Provoked or not understood.
Well, what basically they're saying is, I'm not the one that's responsible for my behavior. And in fact, of course, they are. They are the only ones responsible ultimately for their behavior. But that's a message that they're giving. I did this because she deserved it, she provoked it, she asked for it, she likes it, she didn't cook the dinner on time. I did this for a reason.
That's
It's
precisely
very
what
common.
John Bobbitt said,
And the common
that
excuse
he was a
is,
battered spouse.
it's whatever I did because I loved her. And I think you heard that from, in this case as well.
Even in the note, I loved her.
Yes.
The language of the day today, and that's why I've written this book called The Abuse Excuse. The language of the day today is you defend by saying you were abused. And I don't think he means it literally, but obviously when you have an interaction of this kind, it's going to be 2 ways, and we're going to see some evidence coming out that she didn't treat him well. And the fact that he would use the phrase, I was a battered husband, in somewhat an attempt to justify or lay a foundation for a defense in a double murder case shows us how far we've come in permitting this kind of language to become part of the national psyche. And it's an epidemic, and it's very dangerous, and it goes to the core of our sense of responsibility.
I think too, another part of that letter speaks to how much this has become accepted and tolerated in our society, where he said that we had a good relationship. This was just we had our ups and downs, as any healthy, normal relationship did. Well, this isn't healthy to have the police come to your house.
And the media caused it, and the police caused it, and everybody else caused it, except he
and we can take care of it ourselves.
Look, we have another analogy. We had a terrific judge, David, I'm sure will agree with me, one of the greatest judges in New York history, Saul Wachtler, who I have argued in front of many times. Nobody in a trillion years could have suspected that that night, after you've argued a case in front of him, he was a perfect gentleman and a great judge, he was putting on a cowboy hat, stalking a woman, writing threatening letters, and ends up in jail. Now, thank God it didn't escalate into physical violence, but
he threatened physical violence, did he not?
He threatened physical violence. We don't know whether he meant it.
Yeah.
But there is an analogy in the sense that nobody who knew him believed it. In that case, there were no dark rumors, I think, circulating in the newsrooms.
No.
Yeah. And so what does that say?
It confirms your point that there are no nice guys when it comes to this crime. Everybody is potentially able to do this terrible thing, and because we've had such a history of excusing it and justifying it and understanding it, we haven't attached the stigma to it that ought to be attached.
But don't you think things have changed a little bit? I mean, again, to go back to the journalistic angle, that if something like this were to happen today to a celebrity like O.J. Simpson, it wouldn't be on page 20, and that Hertz would have dropped him. I mean, the consciousness is much higher now than it was back in whatever year that was, 1989.
If something like this, meaning one of the initial less serious...
No, when the police came on the New Year's Day case.
Came around.
No, I don't, because we have a city councilman who was arrested for battering recently. We have the chief judge of New York State. We have another judge, but we have another judge who was...
The case itself, a week from now, if something like that happened, I believe that it would change things, wouldn't it?
I'm hopeful.
Simpson itself has in effect done for abuse what Lindbergh did for kidnapping. There was a Lindbergh law, and now maybe there'll be something in the effect of a Simpson law.
I think there is more publicity to these kinds of things now than before. I remember covering when Darryl Strawberry and his wife were going at it. There was a fair amount of there was a lot of publicity.
He didn't get a lot of commercial endorsements.
No.
Well, but he's still playing, he's still a hero. We still have a judge sitting in the Bronx who's now got 2 arrests behind him. He's still a judge. You know, now he's, at this moment, not sitting. But one bite out of the apple wasn't enough to say you can't be a judge anymore. I'm hopeful that with these kinds of cases and people realizing that it really is so common we have to take drastic measures, what appears to be drastic, which is really just treating it as every other crime, taking it seriously. I'm hopeful that will happen, but it's taken a long time.
That we've all made has to be taken into account too, and that is the fact that he was treated preferentially as a celebrity hurt him as well as hurting the people that he may have.
How did it hurt him?
It hurt him because I think many celebrities get the view, we can get away with it. Call the studio, they'll solve it for us. Call the team, they'll solve it for us. If he had been treated harshly the first time around,
the New Year's incident, or even 7 before that,
whatever happened that night might have been prevented, even by allowing him to self-surrender. They allowed for the bizarre chase, which could have easily led to his death. Had they arrested him, and by the way, Gilgar said he is just dead wrong when he said there was no probable cause to arrest him earlier. Of course there was. You don't normally wait for the results of blood tests to arrest somebody on a circumstantial case like this. What you do is you arrest them. If the blood test proved negative, you say you're sorry and you let them out. That may not be the best way to do it, but that's the way it's done. You don't do that with a celebrity because you're afraid that you get egg on your face, particularly if you've had a few cases where you've lost recently. And so by treating him differently, they allowed him to do to himself and maybe to others some pretty awful things. So I think it's better for the celebrity. I think it's better for everybody else if celebrities just aren't treated differently.
What about the events of Friday night? Do they help him or hurt him?
A lawyer has the ability, a good lawyer, to make that either help or hurt, and everybody is going to try to turn that to their advantage. The defense attorney, if they eventually plead some kind of a mental defense, are going to say, look, he was so bizarre, he put a gun to his head, he knew he was going to be captured.
A photograph of his family.
Oh, all of that kind of thing helps an insanity defense. If, on the other hand, the ultimate defense is alibi, I didn't do it, the prosecution is going to say it shows guilt feelings and flight is evidence of consciousness of guilt. The defense will answer, wait a minute, this wasn't flight, this was just going back to his home. He was really trying to surrender. It's going to be complicated. In the end, the case, I think, won't turn on the Friday night incidents. I think it will turn on forensic evidence. I think it will turn on expert testimony.
And what about the quality of the representation?
Oh, I think quality of representation matters about 10% in cases like this. It's like the quality of the surgeon. Whether you have the cancer matters a lot more than the quality of the surgeon, and here I'm knocking my own profession, but whether you've done it and what your mental history is matters much more than who your lawyer is. There's a myth out there that wealth and brilliant lawyers can really turn guilt into innocence. It happens very rarely.
Notwithstanding what we don't know, is it likely that he would take the stand?
Well, I think he's made it impossible at this point, or difficult for himself to take the stand by talking to the police, by issuing or having his lawyer issue statements that he wasn't there. If it turns out he was there, it's going to be hard for him to take the stand unless he takes the stand more as an exhibit than a witness, that is, to show that he really is mentally affected.
Anything, what do you say, all of you, about what happened on television and people on cheering him on, go Jews, go, and all of that, Frank? I mean, does it speak to what in America?
Well, I think it speaks more to our mania for sports and our...
Is it sports more than
well,
anything
it's more,
else?
it's an inability to sometimes to tell when the game stops and real life begins, and that certainly was a case here. It's interesting, by the way, we saw the same thing in Italy in a different context, but Berlusconi took Let's Go Italy, Forza Italia.
Yeah, right.
And
As
they were saying the
slogan.
same thing as Let's Go Italy,
right.
And they were taking the same thing for OJ, Let's Go OJ, as he went down the street. And I think it showed an absolute inability to place the incident in the context of the fact that two people had lost their lives. I mean, it was sacrilegious, if you will, in that sense.
Cheryl?
And I think they were cheering the hero they had known and were very reluctant to give up. And I use the metaphor of, you know, he used to be cheered when he was, you know, breaking away to daylight. And this time he was run. This was his last run, and he was running towards the abyss. And it was hard for people to separate the two.
But look, you know, people have difficulty separating truth from fiction. There have been a whole slew of movies lately that's come out in which audiences cheer killers, cheer villains, want them to get away. And here you have O.J. Simpson, who is a fictional character in many respects. That is, he's been in a lot of movies, he's been on commercials, he jumps higher than everybody to get to the Hertz counter. And I think a lot of people, particularly in L.A., may have some difficulty separating truth from fiction, and they may have been cheering more the fictional character than the gory, bloody guy we saw on television with his eyes drooping, who looked like certainly terrible.
Could it simply be the lone man or woman against the system, against the establishment, against authority, that sort of brought those cheers on, because they, people who were cheering had some grievance against authority, the system, the establishment, and that was what it about.
I have a hard time believing that O.J. represented that. I think O.J. is more of the figure that Alan talked about. He really became, for the last 15 years, he wasn't any longer a football player. He played a character named O.J.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
That's what he was. He was O.J. And that's all he was, really. And it probably, an awful lot of those kids who cheered him really don't remember him as a football player. 5 years from the game, you're gone. Nobody can remember you at all anymore. And that's what's remembered now, is the O.J. of the commercials and the
It's not the touchdown,
O.J.
it's
of
what
the
they saw on
naked gun.
television.
But it shows a more profound problem with our society, that we make into our role models athletes and actors, and these are people who probably have a higher likelihood of disappointing and falling off their pedestals than almost anybody else.
Why?
And because athletes are trained in violence, they are not often the brightest and best educated. They're spoiled brats. They've made fortunes of money at a very young age, and we have a very high rate of this kind of problem among athletes and actors, and they're the very worst people to be role models for our children. And to the extent that our children look up to these people, they're inevitably gonna be disappointed. And the media has to do much more, I think, to make.
Well, does that resonate with you, Frank? Because you have profiled so many of celebrities, and you've written a book about one.
I don't quite understand. I don't want to get academic here, but I don't quite understand the word role model. Does that mean somebody you aspire to be? I mean, what is the chance of being a great actor or a great athlete? It's 1 in a million.
Kids don't know that.
Kids, yes, that's true.
They
and after all, we are
gonna be.
talking about kids here. You would hope that adults, if you've gained a certain maturity, you don't use actors and athletes as role models. I think we're only talking about children in that context.
When you look at the situation and what has happened so far and the reaction to it, do you notice any, in terms of conversations, what surprises you about the reaction of people that you talk to? Because this is obviously the subject of conversation for everybody. We have been through, in this country, a series of weekends in which it's been focused on one event. Richard Nixon, Normandy, the range of things, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, and now this entire weekend, it was about OJ Simpson. And so people are talking about it. What surprises you about the reaction?
I think despite what looks to be, at least
how little we
early
know
on,
about battered spouses.
well, how little we know about domestic violence, how painful it is to look at, and how painful it is to look at someone that we think we know as a batterer, as a criminal. That it's very hard to look at that. It's very hard to see someone that we think we know doing something that makes us feel as though battering and domestic violence must be all around us. It must be that almost anyone could engage in this. And that's a horrible, painful thought, that it's that common. And in fact, it is. 4 women die every day in the United States.
One thing that's surprising is just the universality of the phenomenon. I mean, I haven't talked to anybody who wasn't watching television. You know, my mother stayed up till all hours of the night. I doubt that she ever watched O.J. Simpson play football.
Yeah. And why did she watch it?
She just knew that it was a hugely compelling drama.
Well, we didn't know the outcome. I mean, you know, many of us were really quite fearful that he was going to take his own life, because when you think about that for a minute, it was a very rational act at that point in time. After all, if he had, God forbid, taken his own life, this case would have been regarded no longer as a villain and a victim, but as a tragedy for everybody involved. The children would have been spared a terrible
Well, it's still being called a tragedy. I mean, this is Time magazine, an American tragedy, and Shakespearean, and all of that are the terms to describe it.
But this is a tragedy with a potential villain. Whereas if had he taken his life, it would have been a tragedy with all victims around. So the point I'm making is that I was very worried about suicide because it seemed so rational. You didn't have to be crazy to make the decision that that was the best way out for everybody.
And that note was not the note of a crazy man.
No, no, no.
I mean, it was very carefully considered.
Right.
And Charlie, if you take it one step further and you get back to the business of the difference between reality and fiction, people know that in the things they watch on television, there is a conclusive ending, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think most of us were almost hypnotized into thinking he must kill himself in a way, because that's always what happens in these kind of chases. Yeah. There would at least be some conclusive ending.
That would be Shakespearean.
Yeah.
And I think the surprise is witnessing this tremendous failure, collapse of character in someone we liked so much and who had such an influence on our lives, and this tremendous failure of responsibility, abdication of responsibility, both by Simpson and by the legal system that did not catch him at an earlier stage and possibly prevent this.
You know, but the surprise is that we didn't know it. We didn't know this man's character. I mean, we had to go back and read the clippings on him because we wanted to write some kind of profile. And there really weren't any good characterological studies of him. I mean, the whole journalistic establishment failed in a way. I mean, we worshipped somebody we barely knew. He was just an image.
We talk about a Shakespearean resolution to this thing, and had it ended on Friday, there would have been a Shakespearean resolution. This may end up not with a bang but a whimper. I mean, this may end up in something like a hung jury. It may end up in a plea bargain. It may end up very inconclusively, because this is real life. This is no longer drama, and we just have no idea. It may end up with a terrible message. It may end up with a Menendez or Bobbitt type verdict, which will send a message out, gee, you can get away with this kind of stuff.
Well,
So
I would
we
think
have
that's
no
a
idea.
concern.
He's been getting that message over and over.
Well, not only that, though, there's also this consideration that some people, you know, who are spousal batterers may be using this. Look what happens to, you know.
Look what happens.
You'll be killed. In other words, somebody's battering their spouse may very well say, if you don't allow me to exercise control, look what happened.
Right. And if you leave, which, you know, people ask all the time, why don't women leave? If you leave, I'm going to kill you. And now you see, if you do leave, you might get killed. He killed her, I'm going to kill you if you leave.
Don't you think he's going to go away for a fairly long period of time? I don't really think he's going to walk.
Well, I think if he did it, I mean, if the evidence shows he was at the scene of the crime, I think the pendulum has begun to swing.
The pendulum is swinging wildly back and forth.
Where is it now, do you think, Alan?
Well, it depends on where it'll be 8 months from now, but I think now people are fed up with the Menendez, the Bobbitt results, although it's interesting. A lot of people love the Bobbitt result because, oh, gee, on political grounds, and the man she hurt was certainly no great hero. But I think people are fed up with excuses. People are fed up with abdication of responsibility. This is not a good time in many respects for Simpson to be tried. It's a good place for him to be tried. He couldn't get a better jury than an L.A. jury, which is...
Because they know celebrity?
Oh, because they are bizarre and unpredictable. This is the Denny jury, this is the King jury, this is the Menendez jury.
But not the Bobbitt jury, though, so why? I mean, maybe it's just...
Virginia.
I know, that's my point. I mean, is it...
I think the public...
L.A. is a little bit different.
The public is getting wary of these abuse defenses, but
well,
not...
that's his point.
Yes, but not with someone like Simpson.
Maybe.
Simpson will... If anybody could carry it off, it would be Simpson.
You may be
Maybe
right.
people will be angry at him for what's been said here, that he has let us down. Maybe if he came to us somewhat flawed, but the fact that he's going to take us down will be
Things
some
like this
sort
don't
of...
just happen.
Well,
Prosecutors manipulate, and the defense manipulates the media to make that happen. That's already what the prosecutor is saying. He was a hero, and he let us down. He's trying to...
Well, it's very interesting how the prosecution is spinning in two different ways here, because Garcetti is saying, you know, O.J. was a hero, and isn't this a terrible thing? Whereas his deputy is saying, let's keep in mind the nature of the crime. He almost cut her head off, you know? And so there's a good cop, bad cop dimension to what the prosecution is saying here. And when it comes right down to it, I don't think they can make much of a deal here. They'd take too much heat.
There's no room for plea bargaining here at all.
I don't think there's much.
There's always room. In a capital case, there's always room. Remember, we are talking possibly about this man's life. So although it's unlikely to end up with a plea bargain, it's
Go ahead.
possible.
Is it unlikely that he would receive capital punishment because of the celebrity, and somehow this will not be allowed to happen?
We execute celebrities.
We've
never executed a celebrity.
Never even executed, I don't think, a successful man.
But let me tell you what we do execute. We execute black men who kill white women. That has the highest rate of execution of any combination in the country.
Not famous black men.
And we don't generally do it when the person that they killed is their spouse or friend or lover. But all bets are off. I would not venture any prediction as to how this case could come out. For example, if he were to use an abuse defense and he were to alienate the jury by doing it, you just never know.
There's no way it's ever going to happen with him.
I think it would be very hard to find
he's
a
too
jury
well
that
known
would send O.J. Simpson to death.
Too many people are going to think that he can do too much good if he ever gets his act together.
Boy, isn't that a condemnation of the death penalty?
Well,
what we've all said here, it just shows it's
capricious.
so selective. You
It's
know, we
entirely-
don't do it
it's
to people we
entirely
know.
selective,
We
that's
only
right.
do it to the thems.
To the thems,
To the
people
thems that
we
hurt
hate.
the we's.
Right.
Let me just go one last time, and I've got to go and introduce Jeff Greenfield. But you are saying, and I think maybe you're saying it, David, too, that you think the defense in this case either has to somehow attack the victims in this case, or B, give the jury a reason, somehow, a peg to hang their compassion on.
First, it has to fish or cut bait in terms of whether he wasn't there or he was there and has an excuse. If they eventually get to the excuse, then they not only have to paint Simpson in a positive light, but subtly they have to paint the victims in a less positive light.
Okay. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to have you here to talk about this. It has captivated our attention. It is, it seems to me, in all of its dimensions, an extraordinary tragedy. Not so much because all of us invested so much in O.J. Simpson, but because of the victims and because specifically, Senator Moynihan was asked on a weekend program, what do you think about when you think about the O.J. Simpson case, and the first thing he said was the victims. I think about those two victims. We'll be right back. Jeff Greenfield, ABC News. Stay with us. Joining me now for our conversation about the O.J. Simpson case is Jeff Greenfield of ABC News. He reports for World News Tonight. He reports for Nightline. And he wears many hats at ABC. He talks about politics, he talks about culture, and he talks about media. Welcome.
Hi.
Tell me about, you listened to this conversation that went here, and you are an observer of culture in America as well as an observer of this medium that we work in. Your own sense of what we've seen since Friday.
In terms of how it was covered, which is the second thing that happens after a big story, the cover, first it's covered and then it's covered. Right. I thought there was no choice but to cover it this way. This was what they call in newsrooms, I'll edit this for public television, a holy cow story. That's not exactly the right phrase.
No,
I mean,
it's a four-letter word. It's a four-letter word, right?
You're talking about probably the most famous person ever to be charged with murder within our memory. Somebody compared it to John Wilkes Booth, who was a sort of successful actor. But we've never seen anything like this. And so the coverage of that flight or that surrender, whatever that was, I thought was absolutely appropriate. What I'm trying to be wary of is the notion of going beyond this incredible, awful story, which rivets us, into the desperate search for bigger meanings. And I think the spousal abuse issue, which you focused on in the beginning, is a good one, because it's concrete and it's real. But, for instance, the notion that these people were cheering O.J. Simpson because he was a hero, athletic hero, people cheered Joey Buttafuoco. He's now on his way to being a millionaire. Why? Because he's a great auto body repairman? No, because he is, in a twisted sense, somebody they know.
That's what I was saying, because he's known to them.
Because he's on television. Yeah. I mean, somebody long ago defined a pseudo-celebrity as somebody who was known for being known.
Right.
And it is true, it almost doesn't matter what you do. You can be a great athletic hero, you can win the Nobel Prize, or you can go to jail for statutory rape in a highly visible case, and you're a media celebrity. Now, this is perverse, but it ought not to be seen as something about our worship of heroes. It's beyond that. It's just about media. The people who line those freeways, those idiots cheering for O.J., I don't think they're that much different from the people who stand underneath ledges when a potential suicide is up there yelling to jump. It's a way of getting some excitement into your life on an awful way, but I'm very wary about taking it to much more portentous meanings.
And so therefore you wouldn't distinguish athletic celebrity from any other kind of celebrity?
I think if a very famous game show host had been accused of this murder, you would have seen something of the same phenomenon.
The same media attention, though. It wouldn't be.
As long as there was enough fame.
As long as they were known. Not that it was such a contradiction for this particular person who we seem to know in a certain way.
Well, I mean, I think, I guess the guy's in jail. Like, if John Gotti had done this, I think there'd have been less shock, although I guess he was a good family man in every sense of the word. No, anybody who was famous as a personality who had been accused of this, I think the reaction would have been the same. And it has much more to do with the fact these people are in our homes every night. You know O.J. better than you know some uncle or cousin of yours. But what I keep seeing, and I understand this, I sometimes think of an event like this as a Le Mans start in a race where 500 experts sort of are racing to the nearest camera. I mean, the most dangerous place to be in America right now is between a TV camera and some of these folks, as you well know.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is this is an incredible story. It is a riveting story. It is dramatic in the purest sense of the word, but I'm not sure it tells us very much beyond that, other than the area of spousal abuse. I heard somebody Friday night in the midst of that crazy story, what does this say about our society and our values? I don't think it says very much at all, except that some people in any society are capable of doing, whoever did this, O.J. or somebody else, of doing terrible things.
Well, it says a couple of things that I think you would allow, which and you have in your comments. One is we pay too little attention to spousal abuse in America, and this kind of thing, dramatize it. It doesn't say anything about who we, at all about celebrity in America to you.
No, look, Charlie, so this is the other thing that bothered me about some of the coverage.
Yeah.
They said, look at the other fallen athletes.
Right.
And they brought, okay, who do they brought out people. Mike Tyson is a little different, but they brought out Pete Rose, who had a gambling problem.
Right.
Wade Boggs, who cheated on his wife. Darryl Strawberry, who had a substance abuse problem.
Right.
Now, those are not commendable activities. But look at what you're comparing them to. A man who was accused of a horrific double murder. And I think the notion that it's this kind of desperation to fit this into some other category that I'm saying, wait a minute. Somebody said, you know, it's a uniquely American phenomenon that we worship sports heroes. No, really?
That's the dumbest thing I've ever
Really?
heard. Yeah.
You mean like the soccer stars
exactly.
all over the world aren't revered? Didn't the Greeks have something to kind of do with revering Olympic athletes? It's that kind of thing that I'm saying, to use a technical term, enough already.
And how do you measure the amount of coverage? Simply that this is what everybody wants to see, and therefore there's no way to escape this hot focus?
There are some stories in which the normal critical faculties that I think you can bring to bear on tawdry kind of things have to be suspended. I mean, I'm not sure that this is a Shakespearean story or not, but what it is...
Why isn't it? I mean, doesn't it have all the elements of that?
Well, I mean
it's rise and fall, it's hero and...
Charlie, you know Shakespeare. I mean, he was talking about kings.
Yes.
He wasn't talking about, you know, guys who sell rental car contracts. I mean, you know, it's been a long way from college, but to me, tragedy has to do with catharsis of emotion through pity and terror, and you have to be kind of great to fall. In this case, what we're talking about is an enormously famous person. But whether it's Shakespearean or not is beside the point. What it is a story that everybody finds astonishing. And what Frank DeFord said earlier, it's not that who could have thought that he might have done this. Do you know anybody in your life that that if they were accused of this, you'd have said, you know, I always thought that Fred, you know, was up to no good.
Yeah.
The sheer, and that's what makes this different. This isn't somebody who took who's accused of taking a bribe, who's accused of taking drugs, who's accused of cheating on his taxes. You're talking about an accusation of taking 2 human lives. And all I'm saying about this is you pay attention to the story because you can't not.
Yeah. You also are saying keep your eyes on the ball, and the ball is that this was a gruesome murder.
Absolutely.
And if we lose sight of that,
absolutely.
then we're losing sight of the main point.
And just, you know, don't give in to the temptation to think that everything is everything.
Yeah. What do you notice about spin in this story and everybody marching out to, in a sense, promote their view?
Well, as I said, the one spin that I think is appropriate, and maybe this is just my prejudice, is spousal abuse, because someone made the point earlier, I guess it was Alan Dershowitz, one of the tragedies in a perverse sense is that O.J. didn't get special treatment. I mean, even today, spousal abuse is treated sometimes as a private matter, and well, you know, just let them work it out, or whatever. And so I think in that case, there's a direct link between discussion of spousal abuse and what may or may not have happened in this case. The spin that this tells us something really important about America. As I say, I mean, I think we are the most advanced in and I'm not sure that's the right word, society in terms of how we deal with celebrity. Celebrity was kind of invented here in the sense of modern-day celebrity.
What aspect of this, if you were reporting tomorrow night for World News Tonight, regardless of that would interest you the most, that you would like to dig into as a reporter? If, in fact, I call you up tomorrow morning as the executive producer, or if I'm Rick Kaplan, and call you up and say, I need, what are we missing here?
Okay.
And I need to get at something that has not been covered well.
I think the most interesting uncovered thing is, how do these leaks happen? I mean, I'm really interested because I never was a police reporter, and I don't know. But somehow there is a network, and this same thing happened in the Michael Jackson case, where instantly, it seemed, before the bodies were cold, people were reporting police sources say. Now, I would love to know, how does that happen? Are they reliable sources? Is this an organized activity by the police department which publicly says nothing, but privately is sending out a signal to O.J.'s lawyers?
I think I know the answer to that. I mean, I think there are police reporters who have contacts that go right up to the, you know.
That's agreed. My question is why the police department does this. Sure, you're absolutely right. These are veteran police
Because there are relationships that feed off of each other is the reason they do it.
Yeah, but I think there may also be, a lot of times these leaks are strategic. Maybe it was designed to get an early confession. Maybe it was designed to wrap the case up quickly. But you were asking me a question, what would I, as a
where
reporter,
do these leaks come from,
how
and
does it
why do
happen?
they feed on each
Let's
other?
get some police reporters on. Maybe this is a show for you. Tell us how it happens.
It might be. Talk to me a little bit also about the television coverage. I mean, we all watch there. What about the decision that NBC News had to make versus NBC Sports and the game? Should they simply have left that basketball game?
No, they couldn't.
No
They
way.
couldn't. Because I'm not sure that somebody hasn't made this analogy already. We're probably competing with each other for insights and metaphors. But if you're throwing a party in your house,
yes,
and suddenly there's a huge commotion outside and spotlights are out and sirens are flashing, you got to leave the party and see what's going on. I think it would have been derelict on NBC's part not to have done this. And I also thought what also makes this issue...
Well, let me stay with that, though.
Okay.
If, in fact, I'm giving a dinner party and there's a huge accident outside and the spotlights are there and everybody goes out and it's a gruesome murder, I don't think I want people to come back and re-engage in the frivolity.
All right, we're going to stretch this metaphor to the breaking point.
Okay.
Had O.J. killed himself Friday night, they could not have come back to the game.
Yeah.
But he didn't. But remember the other element of this that we have to put on the table. O.J. worked for 2 of the 3 networks. And that is what makes this even more striking from the point of view of ABC and NBC. I mean, Bob Costas came on Friday night, who I think is one of the great sportscasters.
Broadcasters.
And you could just see in what he was saying that this was not just a story that shocked him as a story. This was a colleague. And Al Michaels on ABC, who did just splendid work on Friday night, they were in a booth together for many years. So what makes the story so astonishing is not just that O.J. Simpson was a famous person accused of this, but that 2 of the 3 major broadcast networks he had or has worked for.
And I'm told that at NBC, there were people there, staffers, male and female, who were in tears about this, that O.J. Simpson was different. I mean, this brings us back to the question of abuse and battery and how we're always surprised at who does it, and it's always stunning. It's the notion of he was so kind and so good and so charming. But they seem to elevate O.J. even beyond that. Now, we now know because of stuff that comes out. And what strikes me about this, and the thing that I would love to know more about, is the notion of spousal abuse and the notion of rage and the notion of who is capable of it. And how do you separate O.J. Simpson, if he is guilty, from someone else? What's that fine line all about? Now, we don't know because we don't know what happened.
But once you get to that point, and I think what still makes this such a astonishing story is I know people who I think are capable of doing bad things. But not slaughtering 2 people.
Yeah. In a room, in a building where your 2 children
I mean, that's why
sleeping.
I think that's why everybody felt about the words that popped up in every headline and every coverage, the 2 words that apparently were irresistible Friday night were bizarre and surreal.
Yeah, surreal is the
that
one
was
that's gotten
those were the
most
buzzwords. And you know, you can sort of laugh at the incipient journalistic cliches, but you know what they were getting at. This story was unbelievable not just because the country thought they knew this guy, but because literally many of the people reporting the story knew the guy.
Have you seen in all your colleagues you've talked to any swinging of the pendulum on this thing? I mean, in the beginning there's a grudging belief, O.J., no, it can't be, to maybe, I want to hear the evidence, to he clearly did it, why, to...
Yeah, but I guess...
You know anybody that feels like he's not guilty?
No, I still know people who hope against hope that there's some other explanation for this. But I think when I know my reaction the first day was that there was this enormous rush to judgment. Yeah. That we didn't know, every detail was being leaked to...
Fueled by leaks from the police.
Yeah, and that's why I'm interested in that. But...
Probably propelled by whatever evidence they thought
Oh, that's my point. I mean, it wasn't that they were making stuff up. And the other side of it is, well, they must know... See, that's the other cynical part. You hear these leaks and you know, one part of you says... The lawyer-trained part says, they shouldn't be doing this. A man is innocent until proven guilty. The other side says right away, they wouldn't be doing this unless they knew he was guilty. And maybe now, I mean, I guess the best thing we could hope for is possibly in another week or 2 that this thing begins to cool down and let's see what's really out there.
Yeah. That's my last impression, is that we probably, notwithstanding this extraordinary coverage, we know so little about what actually went on.
Yeah, but that's never stopped the press before.
No. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff Greenville from ABC News. We thank you for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. See you then.